My name is Richard Thompson. I'm 66 years old and my daughter-in-law tried to evict me from the house I built with my own two hands. But what she didn't know is that I had documented everything, and when I finally called the police, it changed everything forever. Let me tell you how this nightmare began. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I came home from my woodworking shop to find a legal envelope taped to my bedroom door. Not handed to me personally, not discussed over dinner, but taped to my door like I was some problem tenant. Inside was an eviction notice giving me 30 days to vacate the premises. The premises. That's what she called the home where I'd lived for 38 years, where I'd raised my son after my wife died, where every floorboard and window frame carried my fingerprints. My daughter-in-law Jessica had signed it with a notary stamp and everything. Professional, cold, efficient. That's how she operates. My son Michael wasn't even home when I found it. He was on one of his business trips, which had become more frequent since he married her 3 years ago. I stood there in the hallway holding that paper, and I thought about everything that led to this moment. Because it didn't start with an eviction notice. It started the day Jessica moved into this house. Let me take you back so you understand the whole picture. I need you to hear this story from the beginning, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about one bad person. It's about how slowly, gradually, someone can take over your life without you even realizing it's happening. And if you stay with me until the end, I'll tell you exactly what happened when those police officers arrived at my door. But first, you need to understand who I was before Jessica and who I became after. I moved to Portland, Oregon in 1981 with my wife Catherine and our 2-year-old son Michael. We had $700 between us and a dream of building something that would last. Catherine was a school teacher, and I got a job as a carpenter with a construction company. The work was hard, the hours were brutal, but every paycheck brought us closer to our goal. We wanted land. We wanted a house. We wanted stability for our boy. It took us 5 years of saving every possible dollar, but in 1986 we bought 3 acres on the outskirts of what's now a very desirable neighborhood. Back then, it was just woods and dirt roads. Our friends thought we were crazy buying so far from the city center. But Catherine and I saw something they didn't. We saw potential. We saw space for Michael to grow up. We saw our future. I built our house with my own hands over the course of 3 years. Every weekend, every evening after work, every vacation day I had, Catherine would bring me lemonade and sandwiches while I framed walls and laid foundation. Michael, who was 7 by then, would hand me tools and ask 1,000 questions about how houses stayed standing. Those were the best years of my life, the 3 of us working together, building something permanent. Catherine used to say, "This house is going to be Michael's someday. When we're old and gone, he'll raise his children here." She had it all planned out in her mind. The grandchildren playing in the same yard where Michael played, family dinners in the dining room I built with Douglas fir from a local mill, generations of Thompsons living on this land. That was the dream. But life doesn't care about your dreams. In 1999, when Michael was 20, Catherine was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Stage 4. They gave her 6 months. She lasted 8, and every single day of those 8 months I watched the strongest woman I ever knew get smaller and weaker. Michael took a semester off from college to help me care for her. We took shifts staying up with her when the pain was too bad for her to sleep. We learned to change IVs and manage medications and pretend like we weren't dying inside watching her suffer. The night she passed away, she made me promise something. "Richard," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "you take care of Michael. You make sure he finishes school. You make sure he becomes the man we raised him to be. And you stay in this house. Don't you dare sell it. This is our legacy." I held her hand, and I promised. I promised all of it. After Catherine died, the house felt enormous and empty. Michael went back to college, and I went back to work. But everything was different. The bedroom we'd shared for 18 years became a place I could barely stand to enter. The kitchen where she'd made breakfast every Sunday felt like a museum of memories. But I kept my promise. I stayed. I maintained the house. I kept the garden she'd planted. I honored her memory by living in the space we'd created together. Michael graduated with a degree in marketing and got a good job at a tech company downtown. He moved into an apartment in the city, started climbing the corporate ladder, started dating. We'd have dinner once a week, usually Sundays, and I'd cook the same meals his mother used to make. He'd tell me about his projects at work, about the places he was traveling for business, about the life he was building. I was proud of him. So proud. When he turned 32, he told me he'd met someone. Her name was Jessica. She worked in finance, and she was amazing. Those were his words. She's amazing, Dad. I'd never seen him so lit up about anything. They'd been dating for 4 months, and he wanted me to meet her. We arranged dinner at a nice restaurant downtown, and I wore the one good suit I owned. Jessica walked into that restaurant like she owned it. Tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in clothes that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She had perfect posture, perfect makeup, perfect everything. She shook my hand with a firm grip and looked me directly in the eyes. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "Michael has told me so much about you." I could tell immediately that she was smart, ambitious, and used to getting what she wanted. What I couldn't tell yet was that what she wanted included my house. The wedding was 8 months later. Tasteful, expensive, held at a vineyard an hour outside the city. Jessica's parents paid for most of it, which was good because I certainly couldn't have afforded the venue they chose. During the reception, Jessica's mother cornered me by the bar. "Your son is very lucky," she told me. "Jessica could have married anyone. She had plenty of options. But she loves Michael, so we're trusting he'll provide the lifestyle she deserves." That should have been my first warning. But I was happy for Michael. He was happy, and that's all that mattered to me. They moved into a condo downtown, modern and minimalist, the complete opposite of my house with its wood-paneled walls and lived-in warmth. For the first year of their marriage, everything seemed fine. They'd visit occasionally. We'd still have those Sunday dinners, though less frequently. Jessica was always polite, always said the right things, but there was something distant about her, like she was performing politeness rather than feeling it. Then the economy shifted. The tech sector took a hit, and Michael's company went through layoffs. He wasn't fired, but his salary was cut by 20%, and suddenly their expensive condo and even more expensive lifestyle became harder to maintain. I offered to help financially, but Michael refused. "Dad," he said, "we're fine, we're adults, we'll figure it out." 6 months later, Michael came to visit me alone. Jessica wasn't with him, which was unusual. He seemed nervous, kept fidgeting with his coffee cup, avoiding eye contact. Finally, he just came out with it. "Dad, we're having trouble keeping up with the condo payments. Jessica's parents offered to help, but you know how I feel about taking their money. There's always strings attached." He paused. "I was wondering if maybe we could move in here temporarily, just until we get back on our feet financially." I didn't even hesitate. "Of course," I said. "This is your home. It's always been your home. You can stay as long as you need." Relief washed over his face. "Thanks, Dad, you're saving us. Jessica's been so stressed about money. This will really help." They moved in 3 weeks later. Jessica organized the whole move with military precision. She brought labeled boxes, color-coded spreadsheets, and a very specific vision of where everything should go. I offered them the entire upstairs, which included 2 bedrooms and a full bathroom. I'd keep the master bedroom downstairs, and we'd share the common spaces. It seemed like a reasonable arrangement. The first month was fine, pleasant even. Jessica cooked elaborate dinners and insisted we eat together as a family. She asked questions about the house, about the neighborhood, about my daily routines. I thought she was trying to bond, trying to make an effort. I see now that she was gathering information. She was studying me the way a general studies terrain before a battle. Small changes started happening. Jessica mentioned that the living room could use updating. "The furniture is very dated, Mr. Thompson. I found some pieces online that would really brighten up the space." I told her I was attached to the furniture, that Catherine and I had picked it out together. She smiled and said, "Of course, I understand," but I could see the calculation in her eyes. Then she started talking about the kitchen. "These cabinets are original to the house, aren't they? They're quite worn. We should really consider refacing them, or replacing them entirely. And this tile, it's very 70s. A renovation would increase the property value significantly." I reminded her gently that it wasn't her property, that this was my home and I liked it the way it was. Her smile got a little tighter. "Of course," she said. "I'm just thinking about the future, about what's best for the family." That phrase, "what's best for the family," would become her weapon of choice. Anytime I disagreed with her suggestions, she'd use it. "We need to make decisions based on what's best for the family, Mr. Thompson. I'm sure you understand that." 3 months in, Jessica started working from home more often. Her finance job allowed remote work, and she set up an office in the spare bedroom upstairs. This meant she was in the house most days, and I started feeling like a visitor in my own home. She'd be on conference calls when I'd come down for lunch, and she'd give me looks that clearly communicated I was being too loud. I started eating in my room to avoid disturbing her. She began rearranging things. The books I kept in the living room got moved to storage in the garage because they didn't match her aesthetic. The photos of Catherine that I had on the mantel got relocated to a shelf in my bedroom because Jessica wanted to display art she'd bought. When I protested, she said, "We're trying to make this space feel like home for us too, Mr. Thompson. You can't expect everything to stay frozen in time." But it was my time that was frozen. My memories, my wife, and she was erasing them piece by piece. Michael was working long hours, sometimes not coming home until 9 or 10 at night. When he was home, he was exhausted. I tried to talk to him about Jessica's changes to the house, but he'd just sigh and say, "Dad, can we not do this? Jessica's just trying to help. She has good taste. Let her make the place nicer. Is it really worth fighting about?" That's when I started to understand. Michael was caught between us, and he was choosing the path of least resistance. It was easier to let Jessica have her way than to stand up to her. And I was the one who'd raised him to be respectful of his wife, to value his marriage, to be a good husband. My own parenting was being used against me. 6 months after they moved in, Jessica announced they were going to start paying rent. Not to me, she clarified. Into a savings account for house improvements. We're living here, so we should contribute to maintaining and improving the property. It makes sense financially. I told her that wasn't necessary, that they were family, but she insisted. She even drew up a contract outlining the terms, $500 a month, to be used exclusively for home renovations and repairs. I signed it because she made it sound so reasonable, so responsible. What I didn't understand was that she was creating a paper trail. She was building a case that they were tenants, that they had a financial stake in the property, that they had rights. The renovations started small. She hired someone to repaint the living room without asking me. I came home from the hardware store to find the walls that had been a warm cream color for 20 years now painted gray. Modern gray. Cold gray. When I asked why she hadn't consulted me, she said the paint was peeling and it needed to be done. We used the rent money just like we agreed. It's an improvement. Then came new light fixtures, then new cabinet hardware in the kitchen. Then she ripped up the carpet in the hallway and installed hardwood flooring that didn't match the original floors. Each change was presented as an improvement, as something necessary, as something I should be grateful for. Each change erased a little more of Catherine, a little more of me, a little more of the home we'd built. I tried to set boundaries. I said no more changes without discussing them with me first. Jessica's response was to start documenting everything she claimed was wrong with the house. She took photos of cracks in the walls, of the old water heater, of the roof shingles that were starting to curl. She created a presentation, an actual PowerPoint presentation, showing me why the house needed tens of thousands of dollars in repairs. "Mr. Thompson," she said, presenting this to me like I was a board member she needed to convince, "this house is a liability in its current condition. The foundation needs work. The electrical system isn't up to code. The plumbing is ancient. We're looking at massive expenses. Now, Michael and I are willing to take on these costs, but we need assurances that our investment is protected." Assurances. Protected investment. She was speaking a language designed to make me feel like I was the unreasonable one for wanting to keep my home the way it was. I told her I'd been maintaining the house just fine for decades, that everything worked properly, that her concerns were exaggerated. She smiled that tight smile again. "I think we have different standards for what constitutes proper maintenance." The next escalation came during year 2 of them living with me. Jessica started having her parents over for dinner regularly. Her father, Gerald, was a retired attorney, and her mother, Diane, had been a real estate agent. They'd clearly done well for themselves. They'd arrive in their luxury sedan dressed like they were attending a country club event, and they'd look around my house with barely concealed disdain. During one particularly memorable dinner, Gerald started asking me questions about my estate planning. "Richard," he said, using my first name without having earned that familiarity, "have you thought about what happens to this property when you pass? Do you have a will, a trust, any legal protections in place?" I told him I had a simple will leaving everything to Michael. He shook his head. That's not sufficient. Not with a property of this value. You need proper estate planning. I could recommend some attorneys. I should have seen what was happening. They were circling, figuring out how to get their hands on the property for their daughter. But I was naive. I thought they were just concerned, just trying to be helpful. When Jessica suggested I meet with an estate attorney, I actually went. The attorney her father recommended spent 2 hours explaining complex trusts and property transfers and tax implications. By the end, my head was spinning. He gave me documents to review, to sign. I took them home and showed them to my friend Walter, who'd been my lawyer for small matters over the years. Walter read through everything, and his face went pale. "Richard," he said, "if you sign these documents, you're basically transferring significant control of your property to Michael and Jessica. There are provisions here that would allow them to make decisions about the property even while you're still alive. Don't sign anything without me reviewing it first. I didn't sign." When I told Jessica I needed more time to think about it, she got angry for the first time. "This isn't optional, Mr. Thompson. This is about protecting everyone's interests. Your stubbornness is putting the whole family at risk. What happens if you have a medical emergency? What happens if you become incapacitated? Someone needs to be able to make decisions." I stood my ground. I said when and if I needed help making decisions, I'd handle it then. For now I was perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. She left the room without another word, and I heard her upstairs on the phone with her mother, talking about me like I was a stubborn child. He's being completely unreasonable. No, I can't make him see sense. He's too attached to the past. Things got worse after that. Jessica stopped being polite. She stopped pretending. When I'd walk into a room, she'd stop talking and stare at me until I left. When I'd try to watch television in the living room, she'd come in and change the channel without asking. When I'd cook dinner for myself, she'd make comments about how I was using too much energy, wasting resources, making a mess. Michael still wasn't home much, and when he was tired and stressed. Jessica had him convinced that I was making their lives difficult, that I was preventing necessary improvements to the house, that I was being selfish. I tried to talk to him alone, but she always seemed to be there, always interrupting, always controlling the narrative. One night, about 2 years and 4 months after they'd moved in, I overheard them arguing in their bedroom. The walls in this old house aren't as thick as they used to be. Michael was saying something about giving me space, about being patient. Jessica's voice cut through like a knife. "I'm done being patient. This is ridiculous. We're living in his house under his rules, dealing with his constant resistance to any improvements. This was supposed to be temporary. It's been over 2 years. Michael's voice was quieter. "I know, but he's my father. Where would he even go?" Jessica's laugh was cold. "That's his problem to figure out. He has his pension, he could rent an apartment, he could move to one of those senior communities. There are options. We need this house. We've put enough money into it that we deserve to live here without him hovering over everything." I stood in the hallway outside their door, feeling like someone had punched me in the chest. This was my son's wife talking about getting rid of me like I was an inconvenient roommate. This was the woman who'd been living under my roof, eating my food, benefiting from my generosity, plotting to remove me from my own home. The next morning at breakfast, I confronted them. I kept my voice calm, but my hands were shaking. "I heard you last night," I said. "Jessica, you were talking about making me leave." Her face didn't change. She didn't look embarrassed or caught off guard. She just looked at me coolly and said, "You weren't supposed to hear that, but since you did, let's have an honest conversation. This arrangement isn't working anymore." Michael looked uncomfortable, but he didn't defend me. He just sat there staring at his coffee cup. Jessica continued, "We've been more than patient. We've contributed financially, we've improved the property significantly, but you fight us on everything. You won't modernize. You won't make necessary repairs. You're standing in the way of progress." I reminded her that it was my house, that I hadn't asked for her improvements, that they were supposed to be temporary guests. She smiled. "About that. We've been paying rent for almost 2 years. We have receipts. We have a contract. In the state of Oregon, that establishes tenancy. But more than that, we've established residency. We've made significant improvements to the property. We have rights here now." That's when I realized how carefully she'd planned this. The rent payments, the contract, the improvements. She'd been building a legal case for months, maybe years. She'd been setting this up from the beginning. I looked at Michael. "Are you hearing this? Are you okay with this?" He finally looked up at me and his eyes were sad. "Dad, I think we all need some space. This isn't healthy. Maybe it would be better if you found somewhere else to live. Just for a while. Until we all cool down. My own son was telling me to leave my house, the house I built with my own hands, the house where his mother and I had raised him, the house she'd made me promise to keep. I felt something break inside me, but I kept my voice steady. "No," I said, "I'm not leaving. This is my home. If anyone's leaving, it's you two. You're welcome to move out any time you want." Jessica's smile got wider. "We'll see about that," she said. Over the next 2 weeks, she launched a campaign to make my life unbearable. She'd have loud phone conversations early in the morning right outside my bedroom door. She'd blast music during hours I usually rested. She'd reorganize the kitchen so I couldn't find anything. She'd use all the hot water before I could shower. Small torments, calculated to wear me down. Michael stopped talking to me almost entirely. He'd come home late, eat dinner with Jessica in their room and avoid any interaction. The few times I tried to speak with him, he'd say he didn't want to get in the middle of it. But he was already in the middle. He'd chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. Then came the eviction notice taped to my door. 30 days to vacate the premises. Signed by Jessica with a notary stamp. When Michael came home that night, I showed it to him. "Did you know about this?" I asked. He looked at the paper, and then at me. "Dad, she's just trying to formalize things. We talked to a lawyer. Since you're refusing to leave voluntarily, we need to follow legal procedures, to remove me from my own house." I asked him to explain to me how that was legal, how they had any right to evict me from property I owned. He said something about tenant rights and contributions to the household and disputes over living conditions. It was clear he was parroting what Jessica or her father had told him. He didn't really understand it himself. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about Catherine, about the promise I'd made to her, about the house we'd built together. I thought about Michael as a little boy, handing me nails while I framed walls, asking when the house would be done. I thought about how I'd failed somehow, failed to protect what we'd built, failed to raise a son who'd stand up for what was right. But then, lying there in the dark, I remembered something. I remembered that I wasn't just a sentimental old man attached to memories. I was Richard Thompson. I'd built this house from the ground up. I'd survived the death of my wife. I'd raised a son alone. I'd worked for 40 years as a master carpenter. I'd dealt with difficult contractors, with building inspectors, with code enforcement officers. I knew how to document things. I knew how to protect myself. And I'd been documenting everything, not because I'd planned for this, but because it was my nature. I had files in my workshop that Jessica had never seen. I had records that would tell a very different story than the one she was trying to create. I got out of bed and went down to my workshop in the basement. It was the one place in the house Jessica never went. She didn't like the dust, the smell of wood, the disorder of tools and materials. I pulled out the filing cabinet I kept in the corner and started going through folders. The original deed to the property, showing me as sole owner. The building permits for the house, all in my name. The property tax records, showing I'd paid every year without fail. The utility bills, all in my name, showing I'd been the one maintaining services. The homeowner's insurance policy, with me as the sole insured party. Then I found the folder I'd been keeping for the past 2 years. Without quite knowing why, I'd started saving every interaction with Jessica that seemed off. I had copies of her contract claiming they were paying rent, which I'd signed but never actually accepted money under those terms. They'd deposited money into a joint account they'd set up, but I'd never touched it, never agreed to use it. I had photos I'd taken of the house before they moved in, showing it was in good condition, contradicting her claims of necessary repairs. I had emails from Jessica about renovations, where I'd clearly stated I didn't approve, but she'd gone ahead anyway. I had text messages where she'd admitted the changes were for her benefit, not for necessary maintenance. I had a journal where I'd been recording incidents, the dates she'd harassed me, the times she'd prevented me from using common areas, the morning she'd deliberately used all the hot water, the night I'd overheard her planning to force me out. Most importantly, I had something Jessica didn't know about. Before Catherine died, we'd recorded a video together. It was her idea. She wanted to leave messages for Michael for important occasions. Graduations, weddings, the birth of his children. We'd recorded them all in one sitting when she was still strong enough, but we'd also recorded one more. A video of the two of us standing in front of this house, talking about how we'd built it, what it meant to us, and our wishes for its future. In that video, Catherine looked directly at the camera and said, "This house is our legacy. We built it for Michael, but it's Richard's home for as long as he lives. We want Michael to have it someday, but never, never at the expense of making Richard leave before he's ready. If you're watching this, Michael, and your father is still alive, you honor him by honoring his right to live in the home he built. That's what family means." I hadn't watched that video since Catherine died. It hurt too much. But now, sitting in my workshop at 3 in the morning, I played it on my laptop. I watched my wife, healthy and strong in the recording, talking about family and loyalty and doing what's right. I watched her make Michael promise to always take care of me, and I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I called Walter, my attorney. I explained everything that had been happening. The eviction notice, Jessica's campaign to force me out, Michael's complicity. Walter listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he let out a low whistle. "Richard," he said, "I'm not going to sugarcoat this. What they're attempting is legally questionable at best and possibly fraudulent at worst, but it's going to be messy. Are you prepared for this to get ugly?" I told him I'd been preparing for ugly. I told him about my documentation. He asked me to bring everything to his office that afternoon. When I arrived with my files, Walter spent 2 hours going through everything. Then he sat back in his chair and smiled. "Richard, you've built a case that would make a prosecutor jealous. This is airtight. They have no legal standing to evict you. None. That notice Jessica gave you, it's worthless. Worse than worthless. It might actually be criminal." He explained that what Jessica was attempting was called illegal eviction. Since I was the property owner and they were guests in my home, not tenants with a lease, she had no authority to evict me. The rent payments she'd been claiming were meaningless, because I'd never accepted them as rent. They'd been unilaterally depositing money into an account without my agreement. Her contract was void because it was based on a false premise that they had tenant rights. More seriously, Walter explained, by issuing a false eviction notice with a notary stamp, Jessica might have committed forgery and fraud. By harassing me and making my living conditions unbearable, while claiming to be acting legally, she might have committed elder abuse. These weren't just civil matters, these were potential crimes. "What do you want to do?" Walter asked me. I could feel my heart pounding. I want them out of my house. I want this documented legally so it never happens again. And I want Michael to understand what he allowed to happen. Walter nodded. "Then we're going to do this by the book. First, I'm going to draft a formal notice requiring them to vacate. Since they're not legal tenants, we can give them a reasonable time frame, say 30 days, out of courtesy. Second, I'm going to report the fraudulent eviction notice to the authorities. Third, I'm going to file for a restraining order based on the harassment you've documented." He paused. "Richard, this is going to hurt your relationship with your son. Maybe permanently. Are you sure?" I thought about Catherine's video. I thought about the promise I'd made her. I thought about the house we'd built together. "Yes," I said, "I'm sure. My son made his choice when he stood by and let his wife try to steal my home. Now I'm making mine." The notice was delivered 3 days later, not by me taping it to their door, but by a process server who handed it directly to Jessica while Michael was at work. I was standing in my workshop when it happened. I heard her scream. I heard her on the phone immediately, calling her father, her voice shrill and panicked. "They can't do this. Tell me they can't do this." Michael came home early that day. He burst into my workshop without knocking. "Dad, what did you do?" His face was red, his eyes wild. "Jessica's hysterical. She said you're evicting us. She said you called lawyers. She said you're accusing her of crimes." I kept sanding the piece of wood I was working on. I didn't look at him. I did what I should have done months ago. I protected my home, protected myself. You chose to stand with someone who was trying to steal from me. Now you both need to leave. He started pacing. "You don't understand. Jessica's just been trying to help. She wants what's best for everyone. This house needs work, real work. We were going to take care of it. We were going to make it worth something." "It's already worth something," I said, finally looking at him. "It's worth everything." It's the house your mother and I built. It's the place where we raised you. It's my home. But you stopped seeing that. You started seeing it as an asset to acquire. That's not fair, he said, but his voice wavered. I asked him if he remembered the day I let them move in, how I'd offered without hesitation, how I'd given them space and privacy, how I'd tried to be accommodating. Then I asked him if he remembered all the times Jessica had changed things without asking, all the times she'd made me feel unwelcome in my own home, all the times he'd chosen to avoid conflict rather than stand up for what was right. He couldn't answer. Jessica appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with mascara. "You spiteful old man," she hissed. "We've done nothing but try to help you. We've improved your property. We've put our own money into this place. And this is how you repay us, by getting lawyers involved, by trying to throw us out." I stood up and faced her directly. "You tried to evict me from my own house. You issued a fraudulent legal notice. You've harassed me for months. You've made my life miserable. And you did it all while pretending to be helping. So yes, Jessica, I got lawyers involved. Because that's what you do when someone tries to steal your home." Her eyes narrowed. "You're going to regret this. My father's an attorney. He'll bury you in legal fees. He'll make this so expensive, you'll wish you'd just left quietly." I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. "Your father was an attorney, past tense. He's retired. My attorney is very much active and very much looking forward to this case, especially the part where we discuss elder abuse and fraud." Jessica's face went white. 2 days later, the police arrived. Not because I called them about the eviction notice, though Walter had filed a report. They came because Jessica had called them, claiming I was threatening her, claiming I was trying to illegally evict her, claiming she feared for her safety. It was a desperate move, and it backfired spectacularly. The 2 officers who arrived were professional and calm. They asked to speak with everyone separately. They talked to Jessica first, and I could hear her voice through the walls, high-pitched and rapid, spinning her version of events. Then they talked to Michael, whose voice was quieter, more uncertain. Then they came to my workshop where I was waiting. "Mr. Thompson," the older officer said, "can you tell us what's been going on here?" I told them everything. Calmly, factually. I showed them my deed. I showed them the fraudulent eviction notice Jessica had given me. I showed them my documentation of her harassment. I showed them the video Catherine and I had made. I showed them everything Walter had helped me organize. The officers looked at each other. Then the older one said, "Mr. Thompson, do you want to press charges for the fraudulent eviction notice?" I hesitated. This was the moment. If I said yes, Jessica would be arrested. She'd have a criminal record. It would destroy her career in finance. It would destroy Michael's marriage, probably. It would burn every bridge between me and my son. The officer saw my hesitation. "Take your time," he said. "This is a big decision." I thought about Catherine. I thought about what she'd want me to do. She'd want me to be firm but fair. She'd want me to protect our home but not destroy our son's life. "No," I said finally. "I don't want to press charges. But I want it documented. I want a police report that clearly states what happened. I want it on record that she issued a fraudulent eviction notice, that she has no legal standing, and that this property is mine." The officer nodded. "We can do that. And Mr. Thompson, you might want to consider a restraining order. Based on what you've shown us, her behavior constitutes harassment at minimum." They went back upstairs to talk to Jessica and Michael again. I heard the officer's voice, firm and authoritative, explaining that I was the legal owner of the property, that Jessica's eviction notice was invalid, that what she'd done could be considered criminal fraud, and that I was being generous by not pressing charges. I heard Jessica crying. I heard Michael's voice trying to calm her down. I heard the officer say, "You have 30 days to find new accommodations. That's more than fair given the circumstances." After the police left, the house was silent. I stayed in my workshop. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't want to see them. I didn't want to talk. I just wanted it to be over. Around midnight, there was a soft knock on my workshop door. It was Michael. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in one day. His eyes were red. His shoulders sagged. "Dad," he said, "can we talk?" I gestured to a chair. He sat down, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know Jessica had given you that eviction notice." I knew she was frustrated, but I didn't know she'd done something illegal. I didn't stop her though, did I said. You stood by while she made my life miserable. You chose her side every single time, even when you knew she was wrong. He put his head in his hands. I know. I was weak, I was scared. Jessica has this way of making you feel like you're the problem if you disagree with her. And I thought maybe she was right about some things. The house does need work. You are getting older. I thought maybe it would be better if you had less responsibility. I looked at my son, and I saw a man who'd let himself be manipulated, who'd traded his integrity for an easy life, who'd forgotten who raised him. Getting older doesn't mean I stop being a person, I said. It doesn't mean my wishes don't matter. It doesn't mean you get to decide what's best for me without asking. Your mother would be heartbroken if she could see what happened here. At the mention of Catherine, Michael started crying. Real crying. The kind he hadn't done since he was a boy. I know, he sobbed. I betrayed you. I betrayed Mom's memory. I let Jessica convince me that we deserved this house more than you did. I let her make me believe that wanting to live in your own home was selfish. We sat in that workshop for 2 hours. He told me everything. How Jessica had been pressuring him from the moment they moved in. How she'd convinced him that I was standing in the way of their future. How she'd framed every conversation as a choice between her and me. How he'd felt trapped and overwhelmed and didn't know how to navigate it. How he'd taken the coward's way out by just agreeing with her to keep the peace. He told me that Jessica's parents had been in her ear constantly. That they'd been pushing her to secure the property for years. That Gerald, the retired attorney, had been the one to draw up that fraudulent eviction notice. That Jessica's mother had been the one researching tenant laws, looking for any angle they could use. It had been a coordinated family effort to push me out. I asked him why he hadn't just talked to me, why he hadn't said, "Dad, we need to move out. We can't afford to live here anymore. Jessica's not happy." Why did it have to come to this? He didn't have a good answer, just more excuses, more explanations, more justifications. Finally, I held up my hand. Michael, I need you to understand something. What Jessica did wasn't just wrong. It was calculated. It was cruel. And you enabled it by refusing to stand up to her. He nodded miserably. I know. Are you going to divorce her? I asked. The question seemed to surprise him. He was quiet for a long time. I don't know, he finally said. I love her. But I'm not sure I know who she really is anymore. This side of her, this manipulative, cold side, I knew it existed, but I told myself it was just her being ambitious. Now I see it's more than that. She was willing to hurt you, to break the law, to destroy our family just to get what she wanted. That's something you need to figure out, I told him. But you need to figure it out somewhere else. You have 30 days, just like the notice says. Use that time to think about who you want to be, the man who stands up for what's right, or the man who goes along with whatever's convenient. He left my workshop around 2 in the morning. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there, surrounded by the tools I'd used to build this house, thinking about choices and consequences and the price of weakness. The next 4 weeks were tense and silent. Jessica barely spoke to me. When she did, it was cold and formal. She spent most of her time on the phone with her parents or with attorneys they'd hired to try to find some way to challenge my position. But there was no challenge to be found. The law was clear. The property was mine. They were guests who'd overstayed their welcome. Michael was caught in the middle, obviously miserable but still not willing to fully break from Jessica. I watched them pack. I watched Jessica carefully wrap all the improvements she'd made, as if those designer lamps and modern artwork were precious treasures she'd created rather than impositions she'd forced on my home. I watched Michael box up his clothes, his books, his things, and I thought about all the years he'd lived here as a boy. How different this departure was from what I'd imagined. On the morning of day 30, a moving truck arrived. Jessica supervised the movers with her usual precision. She tried to take furniture that had belonged to Catherine and me. I had to stop her 3 times. That dresser was your mother's, I told Michael. It stays. That bookshelf I built with my own hands, it stays. Those dishes were our wedding china. They stay. Jessica's face was hard as stone. Fine, she said. Keep your precious memories. They're worthless anyway. But those words didn't hurt me anymore. I'd realized something over the past month. Jessica's opinion of me, of my home, of my life didn't matter. She was a woman who measured everything in terms of financial value and social status. She couldn't understand that some things are priceless because of what they represent, not what they cost. By noon, the truck was loaded. Michael came to say goodbye. He looked exhausted, defeated. "Where are you going?" I asked. "We got an apartment across town," he said. "Nothing special. It's what we can afford." "Dad, I just want you to know that I understand now. I understand what I did to you, and I'm going to spend a long time trying to figure out how to be better." I nodded. "That's good. Work on that. And Michael, when you're ready, when you've done that work, my door is open. Not for Jessica, not unless she acknowledges what she did and apologizes sincerely, but for you, always for you." He hugged me then, and I held my son like I'd held him 1,000 times before. When he pulled away, there were tears on his face. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, son." Jessica didn't say goodbye. She got in her car and drove away without a backward glance. I stood on my porch and watched them leave, watched the moving truck pull out of the driveway, watched Michael's car follow behind, watched them disappear down the street. And then I went inside my house, my home, and I felt like I could breathe fully for the first time in 2 years. The first thing I did was start reversing Jessica's changes. I couldn't afford to undo everything immediately, but I started with what mattered most. I brought Catherine's photos back to the mantel. I moved my books back to the living room shelves. I rearranged the furniture to how it had been. I repainted the living room that cream color Catherine had loved. Each change felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Walter helped me put additional legal protections in place. I updated my will to be crystal clear about the terms. Michael would inherit the property, but only if certain conditions were met. If I passed while he was still married to Jessica, the house would be held in trust with specific requirements about how it could be used. If Jessica ever tried to claim any interest in it, the property would go to charity instead. It wasn't that I wanted to punish Michael. I wanted to protect what Catherine and I had built from someone who saw it only as an asset. I also set up something I should have done years ago. I established a living trust that gave me complete control while I was alive and mentally competent, but had clear succession plans for if I became incapacitated. I named Walter as trustee, not Michael. My son had proven he couldn't stand up to his wife when it mattered. I couldn't trust him with that responsibility anymore. The months after they left were strange. The house felt both empty and full. Empty of people, but full of peace. I could eat when I wanted, watch what I wanted on television, work in my shop at any hour without worrying about disturbing anyone. I could exist in my own space without constantly defending my right to be there. It was liberating. I started having friends over again, people I'd distanced myself from during those 2 years because Jessica had made it clear visitors weren't welcome. Walter came for dinner. My old carpenter buddies came for poker night. My neighbor Margaret, who I'd known for 30 years, started bringing over casseroles and staying to chat. The house filled with laughter and conversation and life. Michael called every few weeks. Short calls, awkward at first, but gradually becoming easier. He told me he and Jessica were in marriage counseling, that Jessica was angry about what had happened, blamed me entirely, but was willing to work on things. He didn't ask to visit, and I didn't offer. We both knew it was too soon. What I heard between the lines was that Michael was starting to see patterns he'd missed before, how Jessica controlled their finances, how she made all the major decisions, how she isolated him from people who might disagree with her. He didn't say all this directly, but I could hear it in the pauses, in the carefully neutral tone when he mentioned her. 6 months after they left, Michael called with different news. "Dad," he said, "Jessica and I are separating. She wants a divorce. She says I chose you over her, and she can't be married to someone who would side with their parent over their spouse." I felt a complicated mix of emotions, relief that my son was escaping that marriage, sadness that it had come to this, concern about what this meant for his future. "How are you doing?" I asked. Honestly, I'm relieved. Scared, but relieved. Living with Jessica was like walking on eggshells all the time. I had to think about how she'd react to everything. Now I can just breathe. He paused. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Did you know? Did you know from the beginning that she was like this?" I thought about his question carefully. I knew she was controlling, I said. I knew she was ambitious. I knew she saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities, but I didn't know how far she'd go. And son, even if I'd known, would you have listened? Would you have believed me if I'd told you not to marry her? He was quiet. Probably not. I needed to learn this lesson myself. Exactly, I said. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. The divorce took 8 months. Jessica fought for everything. She wanted half of what Michael had, plus alimony, plus compensation for the improvements she claimed they'd made to my house. Her attorneys were aggressive, filing motion after motion. But Michael had finally found his backbone. He hired a good attorney, and he fought back. In the end, because they'd only been married 3 years and had no children, the settlement was relatively simple. They split their joint assets, and both walked away. A year after the eviction, Michael asked if he could come visit. Just him, he clarified. I'd like to see the house, I'd like to see you. Of course, I said. When he arrived, I saw a different man than the one who'd left. He looked older, yes, but also somehow lighter, less burdened. He walked through the house slowly, touching things. The door frame where we'd marked his height as he grew, the kitchen table where he'd done his homework, the porch where he'd learned to ride a bike. You've changed it back, he said. It looks like home again. It is home, I told him. It always was. We sat on the porch with coffee, and he told me about his life. He'd gotten a promotion at work. He'd moved to a small house he was renting with an option to buy. He'd started going to therapy to understand why he'd allowed himself to be controlled. He was dating someone new, casually, someone completely different from Jessica, someone kind and low-key who worked as a teacher. Dad, he said, I need to say something, and I need you to let me get through it. I nodded. What I did to you was unforgivable. I let someone convince me that you were the problem when you were just trying to hold on to what was yours. I stood by while you were harassed and disrespected. I chose comfort over integrity. I failed you as a son, and I failed Mom's memory. I know you said your door was open, but I need to know if you can actually forgive me, not just tolerate me, but actually forgive me. I looked at my son. I saw the little boy who'd helped me build this house. I saw the young man who'd cried at his mother's funeral. I saw the person he was trying to become. Michael, I said, you made mistakes. Serious mistakes. You hurt me deeply, but you're also taking responsibility. You're doing the work to understand what happened. You're trying to be better. That's all any of us can do. So yes, I forgive you. He cried then, and I held him like I had when he was small and had fallen and scraped his knee. Some hurts run deeper than others, but the healing process is the same. You acknowledge the pain, you do the work, you move forward. Over the next year, Michael became a regular visitor again. Sunday dinners resumed, but different than before. Just the two of us, sometimes with his new girlfriend Sarah, who was exactly what he needed. Someone who encouraged him to maintain his relationship with me, who saw family as something to nurture, not something to manipulate. I met Sarah on one of those Sunday dinners, and within 5 minutes I knew she was different. She walked into my house and immediately noticed Catherine's photos on the mantel. "Is this your wife?" she asked. She was beautiful. Tell me about her. And I did. I told her about Catherine, and Sarah listened with genuine interest. She asked questions. She wanted to know our story. When Michael and I are married someday, she said, I hope we have a love like you two did. Michael looked at her with such open affection, such freedom, that I felt my heart lift. This is what love should look like. Not control masked as care, not manipulation disguised as help. Just two people who genuinely enjoyed each other and wanted the best for each other. They got engaged a year later. Michael asked me for my blessing, and I gave it without hesitation. But I also asked him a question. Have you learned what you needed to learn? Are you sure you're ready? He nodded. I learned that marriage shouldn't require you to choose between your partner and your values. I learned that love doesn't demand you betray the people who raised you. I learned that I'd rather be alone than be with someone who makes me compromise my integrity. So yes, Dad, I'm ready. The wedding was small and simple. Sarah didn't want anything elaborate. She wanted family and close friends in a garden ceremony. She asked if they could get married in my backyard, the yard where Catherine had planted roses 40 years ago, the yard where Michael had played as a child. I said yes, of course, and I spent weeks preparing. I built an arbor for them to stand under. I restored the garden to its former glory. I set up tables and chairs and lights. On their wedding day, standing in the yard of the house Catherine and I built, watching my son marry a woman who truly loved him, I felt something shift. The pain of those dark years with Jessica didn't disappear, but it found its proper place. It became part of the story, not the whole story. During the ceremony, the officiant asked if anyone wanted to say something about the couple. Sarah's father spoke. Her best friend spoke. Then Sarah turned to me. "Richard," she said, "would you say something? I hadn't prepared anything, but I stood up and I spoke from the heart." "Michael," I said, "you've made mistakes. We all have. But what matters is what you do after the mistake. You've spent these past years becoming the man your mother and I raised you to be. Someone who takes responsibility, someone who does the work, someone who values integrity over comfort. Sarah, you're getting a good man. Flawed like all of us, but good. And Michael, you're getting a woman who sees family as a gift, not an inconvenience, who understands that loving someone means supporting all their relationships, not just the one with you. I'm proud of both of you." That night, after the guests left and Michael and Sarah drove away for their honeymoon, I sat on my porch alone. The house was quiet. The yard showed the signs of celebration, chairs and tables waiting to be put away tomorrow. The arbor I'd built stood in the moonlight, and I thought about Catherine. I thought about the promise I'd made to her to stay in this house, to protect what we'd built. I'd kept that promise. It had cost me years of peace. It had damaged my relationship with my son. It had required me to fight when I was tired and scared and unsure, but I'd kept it. The house isn't just wood and nails and foundation. It's a testament to what Catherine and I believed in. Partnership, family, building something that lasts. Jessica tried to take that from me, but she couldn't, because what we built wasn't just physical. It was the values we instilled in Michael, the lesson that some things are worth fighting for, the understanding that dignity matters more than comfort. 2 years after that wedding, Michael and Sarah asked if they could buy a house nearby. They'd been living in their rental, but they wanted to put down roots, start a family. They wanted to be close, they said, so their children could know their grandfather, so Sunday dinners could continue, so Michael could help me maintain this house as I got older. Not take it over, not push me out, just help. I gave them money for a down payment, money I'd saved over the years, money from my pension and investments. It wasn't the property itself, which I still planned to leave to Michael in my will, but it was a way to help them build their own foundation, their own home, their own memories. Sarah cried when I gave them the check. "Richard, you don't have to do this. I know," I said, "but I want to, because you've given me something more valuable than money. You've given me my son back. Now, at 66, I'm in better health than I was during those years with Jessica. The stress had been affecting me in ways I hadn't realized. My blood pressure had been high. I'd been having trouble sleeping. I'd felt a constant weight on my chest. All of that lifted when they left. All of that disappeared when I reclaimed my space. I work in my shop most days. I take on occasional carpentry jobs for neighbors. I have dinner with Michael and Sarah every Sunday. I'm teaching their oldest daughter, Emma, who's 3 now, how to identify different types of wood. She's fascinated by the workshop, by the tools, by the smell of sawdust. "Grandpa," she asks, "did you really build this whole house?" "I did," I tell her, "with your great-grandma. We built it together. Will you teach me to build? One day, I promise, when you're bigger." She runs her small hand along the workbench I made 40 years ago. "I want to build houses like you." Michael watches these interactions with a soft smile. He knows what it means. The legacy continuing, the values being passed down, the lesson that building something real takes time and effort and love. I never saw Jessica again after she left. I heard through Michael that she remarried quickly, someone with family money, someone whose parents owned property she could move into. I heard she was happy in the way people like her measure happiness. Comfortable, secure, surrounded by expensive things. I don't wish her ill. I don't think about her much at all. She was a chapter in my life that's closed now. Michael occasionally mentions her, usually in the context of therapy or lessons learned. "She taught me what I don't want," he says. "She showed me what happens when you value things over people. For that, I guess I should be grateful, even though it nearly destroyed everything." The fraudulent eviction notice is framed on my workshop wall now. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that sometimes you have to fight for what's yours, a reminder that documentation matters, a reminder that standing up for yourself, even against your own family, is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Because I didn't just save my house that day, I called the police, I saved my son. I forced him to confront what he'd become. I gave him the opportunity to choose again, better this time. Walter still comes for dinner once a month. We laugh about the case now, though it wasn't funny at the time. Richard, he says, in 40 years of practicing law, I've never seen someone as prepared as you were. You had everything documented, every conversation, every change, every payment. It was beautiful. I tell him it wasn't planning. It was just my nature. I'm a carpenter. I measure twice and cut once. I keep records. I document my work. Those habits saved me. The neighbors who watched the whole thing unfold still talk about it sometimes. Margaret told me she'd been worried about me during those 2 years. She'd noticed how quiet the house had become, how I stopped sitting on the porch in the evenings, how I seemed to shrink into myself. When Jessica and Michael left, she said, "It was like watching you come back to life. I'm glad you fought, Richard. I'm glad you didn't let them take this from you." My friend Walter from the construction company, different Walter from my attorney, came by last month with his grandson. He wanted to show the boy what real craftsmanship looked like. We walked through the house, and I explained how each part was built: the hand-planed beams, the custom cabinets, the inlaid flooring. The boy's eyes were wide. "You made all this yourself?" he asked. "My wife and I corrected. We made it together. That's how the best things are built. Together. I've been thinking about what I want to leave behind when I'm gone. It's not just the house, though that matters. It's the story, the lesson, the understanding that sometimes the people who love you will make terrible choices. Sometimes they'll hurt you deeply, and you have a decision to make in those moments. You can enable them by accepting the hurt, or you can stand firm and force them to reckon with what they're doing. I chose to stand firm. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than building this house. Harder than watching Catherine die. Harder than raising Michael alone, but it was right. If you're listening to this story and you're in a situation like I was, where someone is trying to take something from you, where family is using your love against you, where you're being manipulated into giving up what's rightfully yours, I want you to hear this. Document everything. Save every text, every email, every conversation you can record legally. Take photos, keep receipts. Build your case, even if you hope you never need it. Because if the day comes when you have to fight, you'll be ready. And know this, standing up for yourself isn't selfish. Setting boundaries isn't mean. Protecting what you've built isn't greedy. You have the right to live in peace. You have the right to make decisions about your own property. You have the right to say no even to people you love, especially to people you love, because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is force someone to face consequences, to see what they've become, to have the opportunity to choose differently. Michael is a better man now than he was when he was married to Jessica. The pain of losing our relationship, the shame of what he'd allowed to happen, the consequences of his choices, those things changed him. If I'd just accepted the eviction, if I'd quietly moved to some apartment to keep the peace, he'd still be that man. Weak, manipulated, unable to stand up for what's right. By fighting back, I gave him the chance to grow. That's what real love does. It doesn't enable, it challenges, it demands better. Sarah told me something beautiful last Sunday. She said, "Richard, Michael talks about what happened with Jessica like it was his rock bottom, but it was also his turning point. He learned who he didn't want to be, and now he's building a life based on different values. Values you taught him, even though he forgot them for a while. That's your legacy. Not just this house, but the man your son became, because you refused to give up on teaching him what matters. I'm 66 now. I've lived in this house for 38 years. I raised a son here. I buried a wife here. I fought a battle here that nearly broke me. And I'm still standing, still living in the home Catherine and I built, still passing on the lessons we believed in, still building things in my workshop, still having Sunday dinners with family who chose to be here, not family who felt entitled to be here. That distinction matters. Last week, little Emma asked me a question while we were working in the shop. "Grandpa, why did Daddy used to live here but then he moved away and now he comes back to visit?" It was a child's innocent question, but it cut to the heart of everything. I thought about how to answer. Because, I told her, sometimes people forget what's important. They forget that houses are homes, not just buildings. They forget that family means respecting each other, not controlling each other. Your daddy forgot for a little while, but then he remembered. And that's why he comes back now, because he remembered what matters. She nodded like she understood, even though she was only 3 and couldn't possibly grasp the full story. But one day, when she's older, Michael will tell her. He'll tell her about the mistakes he made, about the woman he married who tried to steal his father's home, about how close he came to losing everything that mattered. And he'll tell her what he learned, that you can't build a real life on someone else's foundation. You have to build your own, with your own hands, based on your own values. That's what Catherine and I did. We built our own foundation. We created something real. And when someone tried to take it from me, I fought back. Not with anger, though I felt plenty of that. Not with revenge, though I could have pursued criminal charges. I fought back with documentation, with legal protection, with clear boundaries, and with the willingness to endure short-term pain for long-term integrity. I fought back because that's what Catherine would have wanted. That's what our life together meant. That's what this house represents. If you stayed with me through this whole story, thank you. Thank you for listening to an old man talk about the time his daughter-in-law tried to evict him from his own home. Thank you for hearing about the fight I had to wage against my own family. Thank you for understanding that sometimes the right choice is the hardest choice. I hope you never face what I faced, but if you do, I hope you remember this story. I hope you remember that you have the right to protect what's yours. That documentation saves lives. That standing firm is sometimes the most loving thing you can do, and that it's never too late for people to change, to grow, to become better. My name is Richard Thompson. I'm 66 years old. I live in the house I built with my own hands, the house my wife and I created together, the house I almost lost to manipulation and greed. But I didn't lose it. I kept it. And more importantly, I kept my integrity. I kept my dignity. And eventually, I got my son back. Not the version who was willing to betray me. The real version. The man Catherine and I raised him to be. And that, more than the house, more than winning the legal battle, more than anything else, that's what I'm most proud of.